I'd like to welcome everyone here and appreciate you being with us. We are continuing in our class, and it is the power of prophecy. It is discussing specifically the prophecies that involve the Christ. Now, we're not going to do every prophecy concerning the Christ. We're going to be discussing the timeline in which the Christ would be on the earth. And the Old Testament prophecies, actually, as we work through it, will show a narrower and narrower window of time. And as we said last week, if the Christ doesn't come inside that little window of time in human history, he's not coming at all. At all, ever. And we can just go ahead and toss the book away because it has false promises in it. But if he does come within that time frame, then he's got to be the Christ. He has got to be. And I just want to make mention of some things. I've never brought this before, just haven't really thought about it. But this is my copy of the Septuagint, or the Septuagint, which actually I prefer saying Septuagint. But I get corrected by some preacher or other who wants to correct me. Anyway, you can pronounce it either way. Anyway, what is the Septuagint? The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, and it actually began in, no, I didn't put it there. Oh, it's in one of the, it's in one of my slides. But it starts, it is completed at 250 BC, and its starting point was much earlier than that, like 280 something BC. And why am I bringing that up? Because what I'm going to show you cannot be faked. And the skeptics of the Bible will say it was faked. Now, they're going to ignore this. They're going to ignore it. But this is completed in 250 BC, and it is a translation of the Hebrew text, which means the Hebrew text had to have existed prior to this book for it to be translated into Greek. Now, it's translated not in Jerusalem. It's translated in Alexandria, Egypt, is where this was translated, because in the 200s, you have, and I'm talking about in BC, at that time, you have a Greek culture that has been spread. Yes, it has been spread into Egypt. It has been spread into Palestine. It has been spread all over the place. And the common language was beginning to be Greek. That was and that's God working in the background. Now I want to reiterate that what I'm going to show you cannot be faked. And the enemies of the Bible either are ignorant of the facts, or they want to suppress the truth of the facts and don't want to be shown this, don't want to be reminded of it, don't want it at all. But what we're going to see is that, in fact, the Old Testament knows too much well ahead of time. And it's not just small matters. It's going to be enormous things that everyone will agree that, unless you're just mad, that this is world history. And somehow, the book of Daniel knew about what was going to happen centuries ahead of time. And that would include the coming of the Messiah, the Christ being on this earth, which is no small event. No small event at all. Matter of fact, quite often people want to dismiss Jesus of Nazareth. They want to dismiss everything that surrounds him. They want to dismiss the influence, the obvious influence that begins with Him and comes to us today. And I don't mean just Bible believers. I don't mean that. I mean an influence that spread across the world and has been phenomenal in changing things in what we call the modern world. Now, let's begin. And we started this 2 weeks ago, but we just want to make mention when it comes to prophecy, the Bible is not shy, nor is the Bible going to make something kind of uncertain or not very specific. Sometimes it is extremely specific, naming names. Sometimes it does that. It doesn't do that every time. But sometimes it does name names, and it knows simply too much. Okay, so we're going to put this to the test. That's what we've been doing. That's what we've started. And when it comes to the Christ, there are no greater prophecies than concerning Him, or concerning anything. There are no greater prophecies of anything except that of the Christ. There are other prophecies, but not near as many concerning any other subject than the Christ. Now, how broad are these prophecies? Because if the window of time just said, yes, somewhere in human history there's going to be someone resolving sin, that's not too broad. And that we get that in Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:15, which is the first prophecy concerning the Christ, is very, very general. Some point in time in the future, this is going to happen. But what happens if we begin to gather up more prophecies and they're not broad, but it begins to narrow things down? What about that? How narrow are they? How specific are they? Well, some of them are so specific that even Herod knew that there was a place. He couldn't remember it, so he had to inquire from the scribes. He knew there was a prophecy concerning where the Christ would be born. He knew it was there. He forgot where to find it, and he forgot what town it was. But he asks the scribes about it, and they tell him it's Bethlehem, because that's what prophecy says. And therefore he sends to his men to Bethlehem to kill male children 2 years and under. Now, if the prophecies speak of a time when the Christ would be born and fulfill His duties, how specific does it get? And so we're just going to, Galatians 4, verse 4 talks about the fullness of time when the Christ would be here. Romans 5:6 talks about that of in due time Christ would be here. And we're just looking at our timeline. We'll call this the timeline of the earth. That this is the beginning. This is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the beginning. The end is that of the return of Christ and judgment and the destruction of this material realm. Now, with this, just putting in some points here, I've put down with Abraham, Moses, and David. Just putting those down to kind of give us a scale of this. And I've put today there, and as I said last lesson, I can't know where that falls on the timeline. It could be way down here, or it could be almost before the end. I don't know, because I don't know when the end is. But I had to put it somewhere, so I've put it there. I'm not suggesting that the end is still centuries away, or that I know that the end is only days away. I cannot answer that question, nor can anyone else except God. No one can answer that question. Now, the Christ had to arrive on this earth at a specific time to fulfill prophecy, and we will say this again. The prophecies are so specific in time that if He doesn't come during that time period, He's not coming. If that time period came and went without the Christ, what do you do then? Well, the prophecies have, if you're going to cling to them, you're going to have to reinterpret them. If you're going to cling to them, you're going to have to make them say something they don't really say. But what if he does arrive during that time? Once again, there's the question. What if he does arrive during that time and precisely what the prophecies said occurred? What about that? And it can't be faked. Not when you have something like the Septuagint. And, now this has been around since 250 BC, so people have known about this for a long time. And one didn't have to wait for 1948 for the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls to know that there's some ancient texts. They already knew there were ancient texts before the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not just this one, but there's been numerous ones that had been known of and highly regarded, and it is those ancient texts where we get things like the translation of the King James 1611. It's based off ancient texts, and the ancient text of Hebrew and also of Greek. Now, let's look at this. We have Daniel chapter 2, and might I say this, the book of Daniel is in the Septuagint. Matter of fact, we could just take this and read it. Now, what I'm going to show up here is coming from the New King James, but here I have the book of Daniel marked in my Septuagint, and in Daniel chapter 2 is here, and matter of fact, all 12 chapters of Daniel are here, and we see that it is in the ancient Greek translation, but also we have, for my sake and yours, we have English put down so that we can understand what is actually being said, fully understand. Now, Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he is being shown a world timeline, not from the ancient past, but from where he was in his life, from that point of time to hundreds of years in the future. Okay? And he's going to be showing, and I've already made mention of this, but Nebuchadnezzar's dream is going to show that of the Babylonian Empire, which is where he lived. He was the emperor of Babylon under the Babylonian Empire. Now understand, Babylon had existed a long time before it becomes an empire. It had been under the Assyrian thumb for a long time, actually. And if you're under somebody else's thumb, an empire, you're not. All right, somebody else is ruling you. Now, but Babylon becomes an empire when it throws off its rulers, the Assyrians, and becomes an empire. And that's where we have the time of Nebuchadnezzar. He is in here. But following the Babylonian Empire are going to be other empires. And it's astonishing news to him and Daniel and others who would be in that time, because they would understand, yeah, the Babylonian Empire doesn't last forever. It's going to come to the end. And here's who's going to defeat it: the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians, two groups of people who are going to join together. They are going to form their own empire. They're going to throw off the Babylonians as being their conquerors. That doesn't mean there are no more Babylonians. It just means that the Babylonians don't have a power over them. Now the Medes and the Persians do have the power over the Babylonians. But then, after the Medes and the Persians, you would have the Greeks. The Greeks come in. They're going to cast off the Medes and the Persians, and they're going to spread Greek culture. And that's why we have the Septuagint, because it was a spread of Greek culture. And with that, the fall of the Greek Empire, comes the Roman Empire. And then also in this vision is this figure, if you can make it out, I don't have it very large on the screen. What this vision that Nebuchadnezzar sees is a head of gold, this figure head of gold, arms and chest of silver. You have this belly and thighs of brass or bronze, and then the legs of iron, followed by iron and clay with the feet. And these describe 4 world empires. Now, I may have mentioned this last week or last lesson, I can't remember now, but and I wouldn't be saying this except I heard it most recently being uttered, and it's simply not true. It's not a big deal, but it's not true. That these are the only empires that will ever exist. The text doesn't say that. The text doesn't say that at all. The text just goes up to the creation of the church and the fall of these empires. It doesn't say there will never be another empire. It doesn't say that at all, because there have been, since this time, there have been numerous empires around the world. The Incas had an empire. You also have the British Empire that spanned continents. You have the Spanish, who I don't know that they've ever been called an empire, but most certainly they ruled more places than the British. They were, as far as landmass is concerned, I think they win the prize on that one. You have also with there's the Russian Empire. There's the Japan certainly thought it was an empire, and yeah, it had spread off into China and Southeast Asia. It had done that, and I don't want to get too far into that. And like I said, I wouldn't even be saying it except I heard it being stated not too long ago, and we just need to put an end to that, because let's go with what the text says. All right, and not start making all kinds of assumptions. What does the text say? And it's a timeline. That's what it is. As we're going to have similar timelines in the book of Daniel. This is not the only place where it's done. But in this vision, Nebuchadnezzar is shown 1,088 years of human history, going from where the Babylonian Empire was at that point. I'm going with the start of the Babylonian Empire. Where the Babylonian Empire was at that point, going to the fall of Rome. That's 1,088 years. And in that prophecy, within that vision, Daniel 2 and verse 44, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. God's going to set up a kingdom in when? In the days of these kings. And that would be under that fourth empire, Rome. All right? How can anyone know that's going to happen in 250 BC when we know it was translated into Greek? You can't. Even at 250 BC, you can't. The book of Daniel was written much earlier than 250 BC. Book of Daniel is, my point being that if at 250 BC you can't know these things, just go ahead, and this is our evidence, just go ahead and put it where the book says it's from, the time period it says it's from. That's what we need to do. That it truly was Daniel inspired of God under the Babylonian Empire and then going into the Medo-Persian Empire, because he serves there too, and we see that in the book of Daniel itself. Now, let's go on. Daniel 2:44, we just read it. And the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. His kingdom would have to come during that fourth empire. It's the Roman Empire, and it has to outlast all the others. This can't be faked either. Did it happen? Babylonian Empire now in museums, the remnants of it. Medo-Persian Empire, same thing. Greek Empire, same thing. Roman Empire, yep, same thing. Each of these have their ruins. Each of these things have certain objects that are still around, some impressive, some buried deep and have to be recovered by archaeologists, discovered by archaeologists. But what about the kingdom that God set up? Where is that one? It's not a matter of archaeology to discover that one. And that one doesn't exist in museums because the history of it might, but that one continues on to this day. And it is His church. Once again, you start saying things like this. This isn't just a small, trivial matter. This isn't something that one could just make up and hope that they got it right, because the odds are it's not going to happen if that's what you're doing. That this can't be just made up by some man like Daniel. This has to come from God, which means what? Let's go to the ultimate conclusion. The ultimate conclusion is the Bible is from God. It's got to be. And if the Bible is from God, then it is to be obeyed. Not only does God exist, but the Word of God is the Bible. The Bible is the Word of God. And Jesus of Nazareth must be His Son, because all this is going hand in hand together. With all these prophecies and the things that are going to transpire in the first century, all of it is going hand in hand together. And you would look foolish to suggest that Daniel got these things wrong. Understand, the skeptics hate the book of Daniel. They want to dismiss it because they don't even want to discuss it. But you would look foolish to say none of these things ever happened. That, yeah, either these empires never existed or they never really fell. Well, okay, if that's the way you want to think about it. But just go look in a few history books on the subject and you will discover it. Now, we find, well, we already know from Daniel 2 and verse 44 that he's got to come in the days of Rome. And, it is, let's do this. Let's go to the book of Luke. In chapter 2. Luke chapter 2. He said there's a kingdom that's going to be set up. Now, Daniel 2 doesn't say that who's going to set it up. Chapter 2 doesn't say it. Now, chapter 9 will. Chapter 9 is going to say it, but chapter 2 doesn't say it. But we know something major is going to occur in that fourth empire. And we know from the book of Daniel, you have these four empires lined up there. And we see Luke chapter 2 beginning in verse 1. And it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the world should be registered. Who is he? That's a new word. I haven't seen that word before. Caesar? Well, I would from the other Gospels, but I mean from the Old Testament. Here's a new word, Caesar. Who is Caesar? Well, it doesn't take us long, even if we don't know what a Caesar is till we're going to find out, yeah, this is tied to the Roman Empire. This is tied to Rome. And this is the Roman emperor. Now, coming back to Daniel, that he has got to, if there's to be a kingdom and the Messiah is going to be the one that begins that kingdom, then he's got to come between 44 BC and 476 AD, or he's not coming at all. Those are the years he's got to come in if he's coming in the days of these kings. If he's going to arrive, that's a 520-year window in time. Now that's pretty good, but it's going to get a lot better. 520-year period of time in all of human history, that's narrowing it down. And in the days of these kings would also suggest that this is going to occur inside the Roman Empire, which we just read from Acts 2, verse 1. It's going to happen in that time and inside the Roman Empire. So, from our 1,088 years, we've now cut it down to 520 years. We've cut it down just in a matter of a verse. We've now got it in this vision of where this kingdom is going to arrive, and it's got to arrive in a 520-year window. Now, we're going to take this and we're going to narrow it down even further. So we're just zooming in on our timeline, this 520 years from the beginning of the Roman Empire to the fall of the Roman Empire, all right? And then we just continue on. Psalm 69, verses 8 and 9. I have become a stranger to my brothers and an alien to my mother's children. Okay, just as an aside, do we find that to be the case in the life of Christ? And yes, we see that his brothers did not believe he was the Christ until after the resurrection. They didn't believe he was the Christ. So, I've become a stranger to my brothers, and an alien to my mother's children, because zeal for your house has eaten me up, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. Okay, the zeal for your house. Well, what is that? Well, your house would be the Lord's house, God's house. What is God's house? It's the temple. Now, we can know that specifically. John 2, beginning in verse 14. And he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen and poured out the changers' money and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. Then his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house has eaten me up. This is one of those few times where the disciples actually came to a conclusion like this. It's one of those few times when that's even was recorded anyway, of where they see something occurring and then they recall, oh yeah, that's Psalm 69 and verse 9. We're seeing that transpire. We're seeing it transpire. Okay, now, Jesus must come because of Psalm 69. Jesus must come during, while the temple existed. He's got to come before the destruction of the temple, and it's the Romans who are going to destroy that temple. They're the ones who's going to do it. They're going to destroy that temple. So he's got to be there while the temple still exists for him to have a zeal for your house has eaten me up. Well, if your house, God's house, doesn't exist, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. All right? So, when the temple is destroyed, and we need to understand these concepts, when the temple is destroyed in AD 70, so too is any attempt to do the following. You cannot, in time, you cannot know your tribe. You cannot have priests from Levi because you don't know anyone's tribe. You cannot make sacrifices at the temple because the temple doesn't exist. It's been destroyed. You cannot even identify the Christ because he's got to be from Judah. And if there is no proof that someone is from Judah because the temple and all the records were destroyed, then you cannot prove him to be the Christ. You cannot prove anyone to be the Christ. That is why you do have Jews today, not all of them, but Jews today, who are still anticipating the Messiah. They deny Christ. They deny Jesus as Messiah, but they still anticipate the Messiah. And they have to alter prophecies considerably because of it. Does it matter in their mind today, those who are looking for him, does it matter if he's from the tribe of Judah or not? No, it doesn't, because they know they can't prove it. They know that can't be proven. And does he have to be a descendant of David? No, they know they can't prove that either. But prior to the destruction of the temple, that can be proven. Someone like a Jesus of Nazareth comes around, it can be proven what his lineage is. And they can know for certain, well, he's got these two things right. when it comes to what tribe and what lineage inside that tribe, he's a direct descendant of David. There is no doubt behind that, because those records have been there for a while. I mean, his birth would have been recorded there, and who his parents were and their lineage before them. Now, so the temple, the rebuilding of the temple begins in 458 BC, and it's destroyed in AD 70. So that's a 528-year period from 458 BC to 70 AD. That's a 428-year period. So he's got to come inside that period, but we've got to have an overlap, because when it is rebuilt here, there is no such thing as the Roman Empire. There's no such thing. This is being rebuilt under the Medes and the Persians. We've got to have a Greek Empire in between this point and that point. There's got to be a Greek Empire, which there was, and then the rise of the Roman Empire, which there was. So you've got to have an overlap between the temple and the Roman Empire. Okay, there's got to be an overlap there. Now, in case someone needs to know this, when Daniel is writing these words, the temple did not exist, because Solomon's temple had been destroyed in Daniel's lifetime. Before he's writing these things, before he is taken away into Babylon, the temple, or in that particular time, the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians. So when he writes these things, the temple, Solomon's temple, didn't exist. It's going to be rebuilt in Ezra's day in 456 BC and last all the way to AD 70. But like I said, there's got to be an overlap between the Roman Empire and the temple, and it is a window of 114 years. So we've greatly reduced this from somewhere in the 500-year range now to 114-year range. That this is all of human history. The Bible is saying in this 114 years, he's got to arrive during this period of time where the temple and the Roman Empire overlap. And of course, it's the Romans who are going to destroy that temple. But we continue on. Thus says the Lord, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Now, we see where this prophecy in Jeremiah is going to come to pass in Matthew chapter 2. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. Then was fulfilled which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, now I'm emphasizing that for a reason. A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. And I emphasized that Matthew knows where this came from, and he recognizes it as prophecy, and he recognizes it as the Word of God. He recognizes it as existing. He recognizes that his readers also should understand where it came from, but if they don't, he's going to say, it's Jeremiah. It's Jeremiah who has said this. Now, the Christ has to come during the lifetime of the reign of Herod the Great for this to occur concerning his birth. So the reign of Herod the Great is from 37 BC to 4 AD, and that's a 41-year period. But we also have to understand that, this is concerning his reign, not his lifetime. So we're at a 41-year period where the Christ has to come inside that 41 years. So we've gone from 1,088 years now being reduced to just 41 years. But we're not through yet. It's going to narrow down even further. To where? If one had understood all the prophecies, let's say someone was living in 100 BC. If one, in understanding that the Christ hadn't come yet, it's 100 BC, and all they had was the Old Testament. If someone had fully understood, which would have been an extremely difficult thing to do, that is true, because these things being fulfilled, then you begin to understand what it meant. If they had fully understood and taken the time and began to parse things out, they could have definitely known when the Messiah would be on the earth. They definitely would have known. And obviously, there were men such as the wise men coming from the east, Gentiles, I might add, who knew Scripture enough to know there would be signs for his arrival, for his birth. They knew. Now, so we have a 41-year period. Now, we come to Daniel chapter 9, verses 20 to 27. This is known as Daniel's 70 weeks. This is going to take us some time. We cannot do this today. It's going to take us some time to do it. But we're just going to introduce it because this is so accurate as to why would you doubt the Bible at all? If the Bible gets this right, and here we have something that's from 250 BC, we got to accept that Daniel's much earlier than that, because at 250 BC, you can't get this right. You can't even come close. That's too much luck involved in that. Too many coincidences involved in that. And it would be impossible to just write these things on a whim because you could not know that any of it would come to pass. But it all comes to pass, which means God's got to be behind it. Now, we begin in verse 20. While I was speaking, this is Daniel saying, while I was speaking, praying, and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering. So while Daniel is praying, he's speaking, he's confessing the sin of his people, Israel, presenting his supplication before the Lord, someone is sent to him, and it's Gabriel, and it says, the man Gabriel. All right, being caused to fly swiftly. Okay, I think we can understand when he says the man Gabriel. Now, this would be the first time we've ever heard of Gabriel. Now, for us, Gabriel in the New Testament announcing the birth of John the Baptist, announcing the birth of Christ, we know who Gabriel is. But when Daniel is writing this would be the first time anyone's ever heard of Gabriel. And it says the man Gabriel, but he's caused to fly swiftly to him, and he's going to give him information that no man could know. So is this an angel? Yes, Gabriel is an angel. Why is he called the man Gabriel? And my answer to that is, he must look like a man. He must. Fly swiftly to him. While we can fly today, this kind of thing wasn't done in the ancient world. And to fly like this, it doesn't occur today. This kind of flying doesn't occur, not by men it doesn't. Reached me about the time of the evening offering. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you skill to understand. He's going to tell him something. At the beginning of your supplications, the command went out, and I have come to tell you, for you are greatly beloved. Therefore, consider the matter and understand the vision. Notice these words. Consider the matter, understand the vision. Keep this in mind. Listen to it. He's going to write it down. Consider it. These are similar words that we find in various parts of the Bible. Let him who has ears to hear, let him hear. All right? That kind of supplication, that kind of instruction, that what I'm about to tell you, you consider it, and that there's going to be an understanding in this. Now he begins with this. 70 weeks are determined. Now I am reading, this is from the New King James. All right, the King James 1611 is going to be similar. But we're going to look at these Hebrew words. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. So this is why it's called Daniel's 70 weeks, because we have translated here 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. Well, who's your people? Well, he's already identified his people in the previous verse when he is offering up prayers and confessing the sins of my people Israel. That's who he's talking about. Your city, who is that? Where is that? It's Jerusalem, and it's going to specify Jerusalem in this passage. And what Gabriel's got to say, he's going to specify Jerusalem in case we don't quite get it. Or that Daniel doesn't quite get it, though I think Daniel could understand what your holy city meant. Now notice what's going to happen inside of 70 weeks to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. No small event. All to happen inside that 70-week period. Now, I just want to make mention this. We don't need to get into this. And we're going to next week we're going to back up, but I want you to, before we end today, I want you to understand what the Hebrew says. What does 70 weeks mean? Is it literal weeks or is it something else? And I'm going to say it cannot mean a literal 70 weeks. 70 weeks are determined, but in the Hebrew, it literally means 70 periods of 7. 70 sets of 7, which is 490. 490 what? Now, here's the Hebrew in it. At the top you see the Hebrew word for 70. And the bottom you see the Hebrew word which means periods of 7. And that word, periods of 7, can mean weeks or it can mean years. It all depends on the context. Now, if we go with 70 weeks, that's 490 days. That's 1 year, 4 months, thereabouts. And all this is the command we're going to find in the prophecy. It's the command to rebuild Jerusalem. It is, in fact, rebuilt. It's also going to talk about the destruction of the sanctuary, which must first be rebuilt. All this cannot happen and does not happen in 1 year and 4 months. It can't happen. That can't be the case. But if we have these periods of 7, if it's 70 sets of 7 years, well, what's 70 times 7? That's 490 years. Not 490 days. That's 490 years. And that's going to go quite well with the vision that Nebuchadnezzar has that's going to get us into the Roman Empire. Quite well into that. Matter of fact, it gets us specifically into the Roman Empire and specifically talking about what's going to occur during this 490 years, going up even to the destruction of the temple itself. All right, we will continue this and we'll have to go bit by bit through this. Bit by bit. And it is an astonishing thing to see and to fully understand that the Bible must be from God. And there's a lot of skeptics, atheists and the like, they don't even want to discuss this. They don't want to discuss the book of Daniel, how it got things accurate in world history that goes well over 1,000 years. And in all that it implies. And the implication is, the logical demand is, that God's the author of this and no man could possibly do it. All right, I want to thank everyone for being with us this morning. And we'll continue, hopefully, prayerfully, next week.